L'Oreal Krull, and Jen Potter from the Government of BC. So I'd like you to give them a warm welcome. As part of the panel discussions, we will be welcoming questions. So there will be someone walking around with a mic. So just put your hand up and they will be coming in and getting your questions for the panel themselves. All right. I hope you enjoyed this discussion.
All right, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us, both here in person and in the virtual realm. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on today is the unceded territory of the Lekwungen people and the Wasanich people, recognizing that their historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Haishkwa Siam. Thank you to Terry. She had to sneak out, but she started us off in such a good way. Oh, do I have a slide clicker?
Do you have a slide change?
I don't have a slide clicker. Or slides? Do we have a slide deck? Technical difficulties. Council have created. We appreciate their support and all the amazing work you'll find on First Voices as well. Thank you. So we'll start with a brief introduction from our panelists, opening remarks, and then followed by a moderated presentation, saving some time for questions from you, the audience, at the end. So I'm L'Oreal Krull, a senior business analyst with BC Data Service, a branch of the Ministry of Citizen Services that's focused on data solutions. My pronouns are she and her. I'm pleased to moderate today's panel on data initiatives to support gender equity and Indigenous rights in British Columbia. We in BC Data Service are dedicated to developing data solutions that help government better serve the people of BC. If you have your phone handy, scan the barcode. Sorry. Honorable Minister Lisa Baer had announced our provincial data plan. I did have a fancy barcode that you could scan to get access to it, but if you can Google on your phones, provincial data plan, you can find the resource that way. The provincial data plan was created as a pathway to focus our efforts on initiatives that matter most. Please note there's two other presentations from our ministry that I recommend you try to attend. So at 1 p.m. today, Pacific time, Hayden will be talking about the Anti-Racism Data Act, and tomorrow at 1 p.m., Sunil will be talking about the Open Data Catalog. Today, we're discussing a couple initiatives that BC Data Service is leading to support gender equity and Indigenous rights. Oh, perfect, thank you. So I just wanted to highlight that there's much more happening across BC Data Service than what we're talking about today in support of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So essentially, the provincial data plan supports commitments 3.14 and 3.15 in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act Action Plan. This presentation is focused on 3.15, and at 1 p.m. today, we'll hear more about 3.14. All right, so some of my esteemed colleagues are here from BC Data Service, so let's hear a bit from each of them. Please join me in welcoming Ghislaine.
Thanks so much, L'Oreal.
Oh, are you on?
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. My name is Ghislaine Guinard. I'm the Director for Data Management and Governance within BC Data Service. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a grateful settler on Lekwungen territory. It was my privilege to be one of many who participated in the development of the gender and sex data standards and guidelines. I am very proud to be here today to talk about it, and as you will hopefully learn, it's really about building in inclusion and equity within our public service delivery of services. Thank you so much, L'Oreal.
Thanks, Ghislaine. As a proud mother of a transgender youth, this really warms my heart. Jen Potter, thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment to introduce yourself and let us know what important initiative has brought you here today.
Thanks, L'Oreal. My name's Jennifer Potter. I'm a senior product manager, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm also grateful to live on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation. And I have the privilege of speaking with my colleague Mike about Action 3.15 in the Declaration Act Action Plan. This action commits government to adopt an inclusive font so that government systems and services can include Indigenous languages in systems, services, and records. So what that looks like in practice is that Indigenous people would be able to enter their name or a place name in an Indigenous language into digital touch points and have that travel throughout various systems without being corrupted so that it's displayed accurately and correctly, and similarly having the correct spelling on signs and print material across the province. So looking forward to sharing more about that today.
Thank you, Jen. It's so great to hear about the steps the province is taking to include Indigenous rights in British Columbia, to support Indigenous rights, sorry. I can't wait to hear more. And Mike Dunham-Wilkie is here as well. Welcome, Mike. Please tell us about yourself and what your focus is.
Yeah, I'm Mike Dunham-Wilkie. I'm a data architect with the BC government, with the BC Data Division. My pronouns are he and him. I too am a grateful settler on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen people. I've been in government for about 10 years, but I was a developer in the private sector for many, many, many years before that. My current role is providing technical leadership in the reading, writing, storing, and processing of Indigenous language text in BC government systems. And what I'm going to be talking about today, I'll start off by saying a few words about naming practices, Indigenous naming practices, and Indigenous languages, because that sort of forms the foundation for understanding the complexity of the challenge of reading, writing, processing, and storing Indigenous characters. Then I'll talk about how Indigenous characters are stored on computer systems, business rules that deal with Indigenous names. I'll talk a bit about the programming languages and platforms that are used in systems. They all differ in their ability to naturally deal with Indigenous characters, Indigenous language characters. And then I'll finally talk about business systems and what needs to be done to business systems to make sure that they can support Indigenous language names.
Thank you, Mike. Sounds like there are a lot of technical considerations that will take time to explore.
Yes.
All right, so now that you know a bit more about our presentation, good timing. Let's begin. All right, so let's catch us up. Almost there. We have a lot of slides. Okay. Ooh. All right, Ghislaine, please tell us a bit more about the history of the gender and sex data standard. How did we get here?
Thank you very much. That's a great question, and it has been a bit of a journey. We started in 2016, which really all began with the changes that were made to the Human Rights Code. It was amended in order to include both gender identity and expression among the protected grounds covered by the code. There was also a push at the same time from advanced education. They were hearing from university students who were registering in their current school year for post-secondary education, and that the gender field did not represent everyone. They were not included in the options. It was really more male-female and did not include a non-binary. From there, work began in government, collaborating with our business sponsor, the Gender Equity Office. Their focus is to create equity and opportunity for people living in BC, regardless of their gender. They partnered with us within the BC Data Service, where our focus is developing data solutions to help government better serve the people of BC. Now, it wasn't just the two of us. There were also many ministries, over 13 involved, as well as ICBC. We consulted multiple times with different interested parties, including Transcare BC, and we've had the documents reviewed by both legal and ethics advisors. There were multiple drafts, as you can imagine. There was tons of discussion and lots of learning along the way. Now, all of this resulted in approval and publishing in early this year, so early 2023, of the Gender and Sex Data Standard with guidelines. Now, these guidelines and standards support the collection of gender and sex information, and it's not only for core government, but it is a reference for any agency looking to collect this information. Thank you.
Thanks, Ghislaine. You refer to adopting the standard. Can you please explain that a little bit more?
Absolutely. And if you could just click to the next slide. So it really means looking at your service delivery. So what we realized at the start of it was that we were not only interconnecting both gender and sex information, but we were also potentially collecting it when we didn't necessarily need to be collecting it. So the first thing really was to start looking at your service delivery. Are you currently collecting? And if you are, do you need to be? And if you don't, then don't collect it. From there, it's really considering, are you collecting sex or gender information? Are you calling it gender, or are you calling it sex? Likely most of our systems were calling it sex at the time, which is female and male, as opposed to gender, which is about self-expression. So then changing the collection and the fields, the categories associated with that to be gender, if you did need it. So adapting the collection from there, really, to include a man, non-binary, and woman, as opposed to just the traditional sort of male, female, pardon me. So the standard helps support with consistency and guidance for the collection of both gender and sex data. It standardizes the terminology for gender and sex. We know that we do use the two terms interchangeably, and that we don't, completely understand the differences between them, that we needed terminology, that we needed some guidance in how to make sure we were properly and appropriately applying these terms. So the slide you're seeing right now is the final standard. You can see what was male and female on the left-hand side, which was how we traditionally used to collect it. The next slide over, or the next column over, you'll see that we've acknowledged gender and sex are two different things, and the collection then is gender. It does include man or woman, but also includes non-binary. Now, non-binary includes things like gender diverse, agender, two-spirit, and more. Now, working again from the left to the right, you can see the changes that we've made. There are more options. I do want to point out that unknown is for systems. It is not a question you ask someone. Someone does know what their gender is. Unknown is really just a systems requirement. Say you haven't asked for the information, or you've asked for it, but it's not clear what the response was. Then in the system, it would be recorded as unknown. One of the things we noticed, again, when we went out for consultations, or what we heard, again from UBC or university students, and I think it was UBC, sorry, that we did talk to at the time, but they were like, it's confusing to use category male and female for both gender and sex. And that's when we adapted the standard again to recognize that man, woman, non-binary are different from the sex categories of female and male. Now, before I wrap up, I just want to do a shout out. Within our social sector ministries, they have already adopted the standard. They were very keen to make sure that it was not a barrier for any people receiving services from them. And so in October 2022, they made sure that their systems, their applications, and their forms, which were outward facing, so where clients were able to enter their gender, included these new options. And the update was successful, and it removed barriers to service, and they've already had some positive feedback from people, and that was on an earlier slide, which you wouldn't have seen. But anyway, okay, thanks, L'Oreal.
Thank you so much, Ghislaine. It's so great to hear that there are mechanisms in place to support services being offered in a fair and impartial manner, recognizing that each person is so unique and diverse. Can you please provide a bit more context on why this work is so important to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Absolutely, thank you. So as you can see from the slide that's behind me right now, there are some statistics, and they are, I think, rather startling and sad, and it shows that we need to do better. We know that transgender and gender diverse individuals do experience a multitude of barriers that result in overrepresentation in the social sector services. So in short, we really need this change as a first step to removing the barriers for a vulnerable population. It's also, I think, something that we need to understand. If we don't collect the information, we're not aware of how service delivery is different, how it is, creating inequity, as you can see on these slides. We need the standard as well, because accurate data really has the power to enable better decision making and to make the change happen. Until we know that there is a difference in how we are treating people based on their gender or sex, it's invisible. And so we're not able to know if we're actually making a change or really recognize that a change needs to be made. As you will see as well with our next presenter, standards really do have the power to help support adoption and learning with new initiatives. So they're incredibly valuable in that way. The inclusion of Indigenous languages in government systems and services will also have a standard, very supportive in helping ministries and others adopt a new way of collecting information with guidance and to support them in how they do that.
Thank you so much, Ghislaine. That's amazing to hear. Please tell us, where can one go to learn more about these initiatives?
Great. So yes, there is, should I rush through this slide? Sorry. I'll quickly.
Oh, if you
So
have more, fill it in, yeah.
Okay, behind every piece of story. So it's really about data represents a human. We all are made up of different data attributes that go into systems, male, female, Indigenous, white, middle-aged, whatever, thinking of my own anyway. So in the guidance and the support that was provided is really about recognizing that for each of us in answering those questions, there could be a different response. For gender, for example, is that when you're filling that out on a form, is that something that produces any kind of anxiety or not? For some people, it does raise anxiety, particularly when the options that are presented don't include them. So it is something also, what if the data is inaccurate? What impact would that have on you? What impact would that have on the services that you receive? The truth is that we really have confused and conflated both gender and sex in the past. That's not good from a human interaction perspective. It's also not good from a data analysis perspective. If the data we have isn't accurate, the results that we get from them won't be accurate. They won't be something that we can trust. So adopting the standard, data quality improves, as will service delivery. Most importantly, when people are able to self-identify their gender, the province is able to engage with them in an inclusive and respectful way. They are seen, they are heard, they are acknowledged by us. Very important. Our population is diverse, and our systems and program services really need to be inclusive. And yes, to your question about where to find more information, again, we've got this lovely QR code, so please feel free to go there. It's a website devoted to this information. The standard, the guidelines are there. Lots of information. If you need more information, just come see me and you can do this little QR code, and I'd be happy to chat more about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ghislaine. This initiative sounds like a great step to support the diversity of people in BC to be their most authentic self, which is also a goal of our next initiative. So shifting gears a bit, however, still on the topic of identity and supporting the diversity of people in BC, Jen, you mentioned BC Data Service is working on pathways to support the rights of Indigenous people.
Sure did.
We know there is work to be done to break down barriers and become more equitable. Please share with us key considerations related to this work.
Yeah, for sure. So there are many considerations to this work, and one of the most important for us is to keep the work human-centered and to work in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous people. And it could be really easy for this project to focus entirely on the data integration or exchange challenges. So when we first started this project and our team was exploring the problem space, one of the first things we did was create a series of journey maps. And on the screen is a sample of one of these high-level journey maps, and it helps center us on the reason why we're doing this work. So what is on the screen right now is the typical journey that a parent or guardian would take when registering a child's birth after they're born. There are two rows. The first row shows the experience of a typical registration using an English name, and underneath that, each step shows considerations that we need to keep in mind when an Indigenous language name is being registered. And you can see by this journey map that the first two steps are fairly straightforward. The child's born, parents get the registration information, and then there are immediately blockers that someone using an Indigenous language name would face. So first of all, the systems within Vital Stats, if you're trying to register online, will deny it because of technological considerations and policy and legislation. And if a form is mailed in, it will be, staff don't have the ability to enter that information. Now, say we have a manual workaround and Vital Stats is able to create a birth certificate. The next step in the journey that a parent typically experiences is the automatic data sharing with very key partners. So when a child's birth is registered, that information is typically sent to other organizations so that they can access services such as a social insurance number, which is key to getting a registered education savings plan, the Canada Child Benefit, which provides funding for families, and also the medical services plan in BC, which is key for accessing health services. And so what we're seeing here, and became immediately apparent, is that data at a very early stage in someone's life can create inequalities. And what our team is doing is keeping this into consideration, that our goal is to help close those gaps and remove those barriers. Other considerations for this work, because we have to think about many aspects. The birth certificate is one thing that you can see on the surface, but to deliver that, there are many things below the line that we must think about. And so, although you'll hear us talk a lot today about technology and systems, we're also really focusing on the change management that will be required, bringing other jurisdictions along on this work because we know people's lives span across borders, and also how we design services, and most importantly, working in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous people and being guided by Indigenous community. So yeah, I hope that gives a sense of what we're considering when we're taking this work on.
It is truly amazing to hear all about the careful consideration going into this work. Please tell us what steps are being taken to promote inclusion, or more specifically, to include First Nation, Métis, and Inuit languages in government systems and services.
Thanks, L'Oreal. So we're in the very early stages of this work. Our team formed last year, and I'll focus what steps we're taking on in the near term, so the next year or two. The first step is really to always work in step and in alignment with what we're hearing from Indigenous governing entities or Indigenous community members, depending on what is appropriate. And an example of that is when we first formed this team, our leadership engaged with Indigenous leadership organizations to help prioritize our focus. So if you're wondering why we're focusing a lot on person name instead of place name or organization name, it's because that's what we heard was most meaningful. And that process of dialogue and guidance is going to continue every step of the way in this work, because we can't do anything about Indigenous people without Indigenous people. So that's one of the main steps that we're taking, and that will be a series throughout. In parallel to that, we know we have a massive amount of technological change to make. It's not insurmountable and the technology exists, but we need to start future-proofing government systems so that they can support Indigenous languages. And I know Mike's going to share more about what that looks like, but what we're doing immediately is creating a standard so that all new investments in IMIT systems in the province of BC, so whether someone's buying an off-the-shelf system, building something, or upgrading it, those systems will need to be able to support Indigenous languages, and then that way they'll be ready to support Indigenous languages when business changes come and service areas are updated. So starting that now. And then in parallel to updating our technology, we're working with partners on what we're calling the meaningful services. And that is first zoned in on the birth certificate, and then looking at of what services a person uses to access a birth certificate, what should be updated. And we're very much in the early stages of that, exploring the problem space and about to move into ideation and defining what a solution could look like. So at this point, we're working with partners to, when I say partners, it's a fairly large group, subject matter experts, Indigenous community members, to identify some options that would enable a person with an Indigenous name to access services before all of the IT systems are updated. So focusing on identifying solutions, and of course, preparing partners and staff for change. We know that once we have a solution in mind, there will be a lot of change management and communication required. At this point in the initiative, we're really focusing on creating awareness that this work is taking place so that technology teams can start to have conversations and plan about how to update their systems. Yeah, so those are the steps that we're taking, and they will evolve as this work continues because we're just getting started.
Amazing. So I'm hearing there's much work to be done on systems, and collaboration and careful reflection is important to ensure outcomes are meaningful. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us, what do you perceive to be the biggest challenges in this work?
There will be a lot of challenges, but challenges are good and keep things exciting. So one of the most interesting, and I think is appropriate for today, is technology. Our team has already identified that there are 3 areas in the technology space that we'll need to address. I've mentioned the first. We'll need a standard to ensure that each individual system can support Indigenous languages. And then once we know that each individual system, there will probably be other challenges. And I'm interested, Mike, what you think one of the challenges will be?
I think one of the big challenges will be data exchange with our partners. Our systems are integrated with Passport Canada, the Canadian Revenue Agency, and so on. How do we move forward in accepting and enabling Indigenous language characters without breaking our connections to other systems where they may not have made as much progress as we have? So I think that will be a big challenge, and that's one of the standards we're going to be looking at, is how do we do that?
Yeah, that'll be good. And fortunately, it's 2023, and we've got a lot of cool technology that can help us with that. And then the other area is around person name standard. So similar to the gender and sex data standard that Ghislaine talked about, ensuring that when we're asking to collect information, we're doing it in a respectful way that isn't harmful to people that are using services, and also that we're doing it in a consistent way so that we're creating quality data that we can use for other purposes. So I know Mike has done a lot of research into this area, so I'll pass it over to you to talk a bit about the naming practices.
Yeah, so I'll start off by talking about the naming practices. I think we all have a concept of what a person's name looks like. We have a first name, a last name. Some people have middle names. Names are limited in length. What else? Oh, our names start with the capital letter and then have small letters after that. in Indigenous cultures, that's not always the case. Some people may just have a single name. So systems that ask for a first name and a last name, what do you do when you just have a single name? Some systems convert the name that you enter to totally uppercase. Some names are already uppercase and only uppercase. Some are only lowercase in different languages. So those are two challenges that we'll have to look at with business systems. And as well, names just contain the letters and maybe a hyphen. Indigenous language names may have numbers, other symbols, and so on. And a lot of computer systems won't let you enter anything but a letter. Even hyphens are a problem, as I found out when I try and make an airline booking. So the First Peoples Cultural Council, which L'Oreal mentioned earlier, has done a lot of work in this area, and they've produced an excellent YouTube video, which I have a link to there. And in that video, they talk about this in quite a bit more detail. And they also talk about language writing systems. The oral languages, the First Nations oral languages, have been around for thousands of years. The written forms are relatively new, and there's a number of different written forms that are used. There's 34 languages, at least, and several dialects. They use different systems for representing those sounds. And some systems, which I'll call Latin Roman, are based on characters that you could find on a typewriter, either by typing a character or typing backspacing. And I don't know if people remember how you used to underline with a typewriter. You type something and then back. Anyway, so characters that could be done that way are in this type of language system. And then there's the International Phonetic Alphabet, which was developed by linguists for the purposes of linguists and other academics that tries to look at all the different sounds the voice can make and gives a representation for each one of them. And the important thing about IPA is it was developed by linguists for academic purposes. It's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily meet the needs of Indigenous communities. Syllabic is another approach where syllables are given symbols. And then some languages have been developed by communities themselves. And for example, the Tsinkotan language used here on Vancouver Island has been developed by the Tsinkotan community. And they've introduced new characters to the Unicode, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Thank you, Mike. It is important to recognize that there are over 34 First Nation languages in British Columbia, with over 200 distinct First Nations. Recognizing that there will be more characters than that found in the English language, how will this affect the way data is stored?
Well, most of the systems that I've ever worked on, and I imagine a number of you have worked on, assume that the only characters are ASCII characters, or perhaps the characters in an extended version of ASCII called Windows 1252. Those character sets are limited to 256 characters, far too few to represent all the characters in Indigenous languages. So we need to use something else called Unicode. Unicode has been around since about 1990. It's a character set of 150,000 characters right now, and it grows every year. There's a new version of Unicode produced every year. As an example, the Tsinkotan community asked for characters to be added to Unicode in 2004 for their language. So it's continually evolving. It's an international standard. It's not only a set of characters, but also a set of procedures, code, standards for how you deal with characters in various languages. There's a number of different ways of representing Unicode in computer systems. UTF-8 is one such system. It's a variable length encoding. It has the benefit that ASCII characters are exactly the same in Unicode. Other characters take more bytes, but can be accommodated as well.
All right, so let me see if I have this right. I'm hearing that ASCII only deals with the letters and symbols that I can see on my keyboard,
That's right. Yeah.
whereas Unicode will allow computer systems to interpret many more characters or combinations of characters, and may take a slight bit more storage and require some testing to see what functionality needs to be improved.
Yeah, it could take a bit more storage, and they're variable length, which adds complexity. And Unicode includes every character used in every language in the world, past and present. So
Amazing.
it's really expansive.
So to summarize, what do we have to do to ensure our systems are ready to support Indigenous language names?
I just wanted to compare how we used to program in an ASCII world, where every character took exactly 1 byte of storage. So if we were parsing a string of characters, we could just advance the memory pointer 1 byte at a time, and we could pick off each of the characters. There's only one way to encode a character. What the user perceives as a character, a symbol, and a character are exactly the same. So an E would be one character, an E with an accent would be another character. The accent itself might be another character. Those are available in the Windows 1252 character set. And sort order is very well defined. We all know what it means to sort a list in alphabetical order, for example. And searching is simple for all of the reasons that I've just stated. But in the Unicode world, it's a bit more complicated, because a Unicode character can take between 1 and 4 bytes of storage. So it's not always a fixed length, it's variable length. Some pairs of Unicode characters are visually indistinguishable as well. For example, the Cyrillic and Latin letter A's are separate characters. They look exactly the same, or they may look exactly the same, but they're actually stored differently in Unicode. And what the user perceives as a character and what is actually a character could be different. So when I see an E with an accent over top of it, that's called a grapheme. It's a collection of characters. It's a collection of an E with a combining accent above it. So it's actually 2 characters. And many of the Indigenous languages are composed that way. So a lot of the symbols you see in Indigenous language text might be combinations of Unicode characters, and that adds some complexity. And it's not always clear how to sort a list that has these diacritics. You know, where does E with an accent come related to the other E's? Does it come after all the other letters, or does it come in between the E and the F? You know, that sort of thing. So that's a lot of our business systems were written to assume the ASCII character set, and there's business rules and programming techniques that assume that you're always dealing with ASCII. But unless we've programmed in a multinational environment where we're developing systems to be used in other countries that don't use English, we probably have never encountered the need to use Unicode.
And did you talk about keyboards?
Oh, keywords. Is that the slide? Okay. Yeah, so the First Peoples Cultural Council as well has developed a number of virtual keyboards, so that people often ask, well, how do you type these special characters and stuff on a keyboard when you only have like the A through Z letters and so on? And you can download a virtual keyboard for any of the 34 languages and dialects, and that can be used to enter Indigenous language text into a computer system.
Perfect, thanks, Mike. So you're saying that we can download open source free keyboards to be able to type in different languages with our existing keyboard?
That's right.
Amazing, that's fantastic. Thank you for all these considerations. Your technical expertise is so appreciated and insightful. Jen, would you mind providing a quick summary and let the audience know where they can keep updated as progress is made?
For sure, and I'll keep it really quick so that we have some time for questions, hopefully. Big summary is that for data to be equitable, we do need to provide standards and guidance to support it and be thoughtful about it. So one of the things that we're releasing is a data standard in the coming year that will be supported by guidance, and it will all be in the open. That guidance will be supported by a GitHub site. Mike has started that for us, which is really great. It has, what does it have on it, Mike?
It has a lot of references to where you can find out more about this. There's been a lot written about Unicode and how to program with Unicode. There's some really, basic seminal articles on how to deal with Unicode characters. And there's program code snippets and SQL for different databases to check the character set and do conversions between character sets and so on.
Yeah, so
A
some
lot of
really good
material.
stuff, test data. And we're really hoping that folks here today, if you pull out your phone and we go to the next slide, you can scan this QR code and scroll to the bottom of the page, enter your email address and subscribe for updates. When we release the standard, we will be pushing an update on our webpage, and that will provide information on how you can contribute to this and use knowledge from this. So it's going to take a village to move this forward, and we're really excited to do it and to expand the network of people contributing to this body of knowledge.
Thank you so much. So now it's time to hear from you, our audience. Please raise your hand if you have a question. There will also be virtual questions, so if they come through, we'll try to alternate. But yeah, we've got about 10 or 15 to answer questions. Oh, in the back there? Oh, right.
Yes. No.
Stentorian tone. Thanks very much. Lovely. Thank you very much for all of that. As you mentioned, the history of Indigenous ways of knowing very often was not written. As you're developing these systems to take into account these newer kind of retrofitted ways of expressing those things in terms of graphemes and so on, have you also had any discussion about like voice interface, both as a means of providing alternative accessible means for Indigenous people to interact with things who don't have keyboard, like people who are different physically abled, and also in service of language preservation and addressing some of the moral shortcomings with underserved languages in like the natural language space? Does that make sense? Sorry, I should have written that down before I asked the question.
I think I know where you're going with that. So the First Peoples Cultural Council is a Crown corporation or an initiative, First Peoples Cultural Council is a Crown corporation within BC, and they have an initiative called First Voices that is doing a lot of that work on language preservation, and I'd highly encourage you to look at their website. You can go on there, and communities are using it as a space to save how would you say that? Like actual audio recordings of the languages. In terms of natural language processing, that's something that communities would need to decide and pursue. I know that a lot of big tech companies are definitely aware of it and interested in it. It's just not there yet in BC. There is an example in, I think it's Northwest Territories or the Yukon, where the Inuit language has been, Microsoft has a translation for the Inuit language. And one of the reasons for that is that they've had Inuit as a second language for quite a while, and they have quite a bit of training data that they've been able to use. We are thinking too, one of the things that came out of an early consultation we did on the birth certificate work was pronunciation supports, and thinking about could there be like a QR code or another mechanism where if someone shows their card, it can play an audio recording of how to say their name. So trying to think of creative solutions like that to support pronunciation and ultimately revitalize language and culture. I'm so blind, I know I'm getting a time warning, but I can't see the number on it.
1 minute.
Okay, and that's a wrap.
Thank you all for your time. You've been a great audience. Ghislaine, Mike, Jen, thank you so much for providing all this great information. It's clear these initiatives play a crucial role in advancing equitable access to provincial services. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, L'Oreal.